My husband called me ugly in front of his friends and ditched me at the restaurant. That night, I had dinner on the private terrace of a five-star hotel. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening myself. My name is Evelyn Miller. I'm 58 years old and I live in Chicago, in a small apartment in Lincoln Park that perpetually smells of burnt coffee and the remnants of a life I thought was mine. For 30 years, I thought I was building something solid with Howard, my husband. 30 years of believing his silences were contemplation, his insults were just stress from work, and his absences were necessary for our future. How naive I was. It was my birthday, April 14th, a date I used to fill with ridiculous expectations, as if the universe owed me something special for having survived another year by his side. I woke up that morning with the silly excitement of a 5-year-old waiting for a surprise. Howard had already left for work without saying happy birthday, but I consoled myself by thinking he would in the evening. There was always an excuse to justify his indifference. I put on my navy blue dress, the one he once said made me look presentable. It was the only compliment I could remember receiving in the last 5 years. Presentable. As if I were a piece of furniture that didn't clash too much with the decor. I carefully applied my makeup, covering the dark circles left by years of sleepless nights, waiting for him, wondering where he was, who he was with, if he ever thought of me when he wasn't forced to see me. The mirror reflected the image of a woman who had forgotten how to truly smile. My gray hairs were starting to peek through the brown dye I religiously applied every month, like an act of resistance against the passage of time that Howard reminded me of daily. "You're not what you used to be," he would say, as if I didn't know, as if I didn't live in this body that had changed, that had aged while taking care of his. I spent the afternoon cooking his favorite dinner, a slow-cooked pot roast with vegetables I had started prepping the night before. The aroma filled the kitchen, mingling with the sound of the TV murmuring news that no longer mattered to me. Every time I heard footsteps in the building's hallway, my heart would race, preparing myself to receive some sign of affection, some acknowledgement that it was my special day. But Howard came home late, as always. He walked in without looking at me, went straight to the shower, and when he came out, dressed in his best suit, he said, "Let's go. I made a reservation at the Sterling Grill to celebrate your birthday." My heart leaped with joy. The Sterling Grill, an elegant steakhouse in the Loop where we had never been together. Finally, I thought, he's finally going to treat me as I deserve. He's finally going to show me that I still mean something to him. The L train ride to downtown was silent. I was nervous, fixing my hair, checking my makeup in the reflection of the windows. Howard was staring at his phone, typing messages that were clearly more important than talking to me on my birthday. But I remained hopeful. Maybe it was a surprise. Maybe he was planning something special. When we arrived at the restaurant, I was surprised to see a group of men and women waiting at a long table. I recognized them. They were his friends from work, with their wives. Edward, the head of sales, with his new wife, Christine, a bleach-blonde 30-year-old wearing a dress that cost more than 3 months of my rent. James, the accountant, with Karen, who always looked at me with that fake smile of someone who feels superior. And Robert, his partner, with Patricia, who had a habit of talking about her trips to Aspen as if she were a war hero recounting her exploits. My stomach tightened. It wasn't a romantic dinner. It was a work meeting disguised as a celebration. But I tried to smile, to behave like the perfect wife I had been for 3 decades. "Evelyn!" Edward shouted with that false cheerfulness used with small children. "We finally get to meet Howard's famous wife." I sat in the chair Howard indicated at the end of the table, far from him. As always, I was an accessory, not the center of attention. The conversation flowed around business, money, and people I didn't know. I stayed quiet, smiling when I thought I should smile, nodding when it seemed appropriate. It was then that Robert, several glasses of expensive Napa Cabernet in, looked at me with glassy eyes and delivered the first stab. "And who is this? Howard's new cleaning lady?" Laughter erupted like shattering glass. Howard laughed louder than anyone, slapping the table as if it were the cleverest joke he had ever heard. I felt the blood rush to my face, the air leaving my lungs. I tried to play it off, to take a sip of water, but my hands were shaking. Christine, Edward's blonde, looked me up and down with the calculated cruelty only women who have turned their beauty into a weapon possess. "Howard, honey," she said in a syrupy voice, addressing my husband as if I didn't exist. "You should really treat your wife to a makeover. She looks more like your mother than your wife." The silence that followed was worse than the laughter. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for my reaction, enjoying my humiliation as if it were part of the evening's entertainment. But the worst was yet to come. Howard, without hesitation, without a shred of compassion in his eyes, looked at me and spoke the words that would shatter me forever. A makeover? For that, she'd need a new face. But she's too old for that, not even if it were free. The world stopped. The restaurant's noises faded away. The lights became blurry. I felt as if my soul had been ripped from my chest and trampled on in front of strangers. It was my birthday. This was the man who had promised me eternal love, and he was destroying me for sport. I got up as best I could, my legs trembling, mumbling something about going to the restroom. I walked between the tables, dodging waiters and patrons, feeling like everyone was watching me, that everyone knew what had happened. The bathroom became my refuge, my sanctuary of humiliation. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw my flushed face, my teary eyes, my smeared makeup, but I also saw something else. I saw years of sacrifice, of giving myself to a man who had never valued me, of becoming the shadow of a life that was never really mine. I saw a woman who had lost her identity for someone who saw her as an inconvenience. I took a deep breath. I fixed my makeup, and I made a decision. When I returned to the table, Howard was gone. He left with James, Robert informed me without the slightest trace of shame. Said he'd leave you cash for a cab. There was no cash, no message, no explanation, just the echo of laughter that still rang in my ears and the unpaid bill for a dinner I hadn't asked for. At 58, on my birthday, I was abandoned like trash in front of strangers who enjoyed every second of my humiliation. I left the restaurant into the spring drizzle of Chicago. The streets of the Loop glistened with the yellow light of the street lamps, making everything look like an old movie. My shoes echoed against the wet pavement, each step marking the rhythm of a life that had just changed forever. But I didn't go home, not that night. I hailed a cab and told the driver, "Take me to the most elegant hotel you know." That night, I was going to have dinner too, but I would do it with dignity. The taxi dropped me off in front of the Grand Astor on Michigan Avenue. Its golden lights reflected in the puddles on the sidewalk like tiny suns fallen from the sky. The doorman, an older man in a pristine uniform, looked at me strangely as I arrived soaked, with my makeup running, shaking from cold and rage. But he said nothing. He just opened the door for me with the elegance of someone who has seen it all. I walked into the lobby as if I owned the place. Exotic plants perfumed the air, mixing with the scent of fine leather from the Chesterfield sofas and the soft echo of conversations in languages I didn't understand. Important people. People who were worth something to someone. People who would never be abandoned in a restaurant like a used napkin. I approached the reception desk. A young woman with a gentle southern accent smiled at me with genuine warmth. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I want to have dinner on the terrace," I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. She glanced towards the windows, where the rain was beating against the glass like desperate tears. "It's raining, ma'am. We have the main restaurant available, or a private room if you prefer." "The terrace," I insisted. "I want to dine alone, and I want a glass of wine that doesn't taste like sadness." Sarah, as I read on her golden name tag, studied me for a moment. There was something in her eyes that calmed me. It wasn't pity. It was understanding, as if she recognized in me someone who needed to do something important, however strange. "Of course, ma'am. We'll set everything up for you on the covered terrace. It will be perfect." She led me through carpeted hallways to a terrace overlooking the hotel garden. She had them turn on gas heaters, placed a cashmere blanket over my shoulders, and set up a small table with a white tablecloth and silver cutlery. The lights of Chicago twinkled in the distance like earthbound stars, and for the first time in years, I felt important. "What would you like for dinner, ma'am?" I looked at the menu. dishes with French names, prices that amounted to a week of my household allowance. At home, Howard gave me $100 a week for house expenses. "So you can learn to budget?" he'd say, as if I were a spoiled child, and not the woman who had kept his home immaculate for 3 decades. "Bring me the best you have," I said, "and a bottle of that Napa Cabernet, the good stuff, the kind important men drink." Sarah nodded and disappeared behind the glass doors. I was left alone with my rage, my shame, and 30 years of memories that suddenly seemed written in a language I no longer understood. I remembered the first time Howard belittled me in front of others. It was at his sister Megan's wedding, 15 years ago. I was wearing a green dress that I had saved for months to buy, working extra shifts at the insurance office where I was a secretary. I felt beautiful that night, pretty, worthy of being by his side. But when his brother-in-law asked what I did for a living and I replied that I was a secretary, Howard interjected. "For now," he said, as if it were something temporary, something I was going to overcome. "She's studying to be something more useful." It wasn't true. I wasn't studying anything, but he needed to justify my existence to his family, who saw me as someone beneath their social standing. That night, in the car, I asked him why he had lied. "I didn't lie," he answered without taking his eyes off the road. "I just said what should be true. What should be true. As if my job, my effort, my dedication weren't enough. As if I weren't enough." Sarah returned with a tray that looked like a work of art. Salmon carpaccio with capers, black truffle risotto, rack of lamb with aromatic herbs. And the wine. My God, the wine. Every sip tasted like freedom, like reclaimed dignity, like the woman I had been before I became Howard's shadow. As I ate, more memories surfaced. All painful, all humiliating. The time Howard asked me not to come to his company's Christmas dinner because my conversations bore important people. I stayed home, cooking him a special dinner that I found cold when he returned at 3 a.m, smelling of a perfume that wasn't mine. The time I got the flu and had to drag myself to the hospital alone because he had a crucial meeting he couldn't cancel. I spent 6 hours in the emergency room, vomiting into a plastic bag, while he was having dinner with clients at the best restaurant on the Gold Coast. The time my mother died and he showed up 2 hours late to the funeral because he had to close an important deal. He didn't even hug me. He stayed on the phone during the service, as if my grief were an inconvenience interfering with his business. But the worst memory of all came with dessert. A Belgian chocolate lava cake that tasted of sin and revenge. 3 years ago, when I turned 55, I decided to surprise him. I had been saving money in secret for months, hiding $5 and $10 bills in a cookie tin he never touched. I wanted to buy him a Swiss watch, one of those he always admired in shop windows, but said were too expensive for our budget. On his birthday, I made him his favorite breakfast: toast with prosciutto, black coffee, and fresh squeezed orange juice. I placed the gift wrapped in gold paper next to his cup, with a card I had written and rewritten 10 times to find the perfect words. "For the man who makes every day worth living." Howard unwrapped the gift without looking at me. When he saw the watch, his expression didn't change. No surprise, no gratitude, no love. "Where did you get the money?" was all he said. I explained that I had saved, worked extra hours, deprived myself of small pleasures for months to buy him something that would make him happy. "You're reckless," he replied, putting the watch back in its box. "We could have invested this money in something useful, fixing up the house, paying down debt. But no, you'd rather waste it on nonsense." Nonsense. My love was nonsense to him. That night, when I thought he was asleep, I heard him on the phone with someone. "My wife got me a ridiculously expensive watch," he said, laughing. "She thinks I'm like one of those dumb husbands in the movies who gets all emotional over sentimental nonsense. She doesn't know I'm returning it tomorrow for something practical." And he did. The next day, he exchanged my watch for a new power tool for his workshop. He didn't even tell me. I found out when I saw the empty box in the trash. Sarah brought me coffee, a coffee that tasted like hope. "Are you all right, ma'am?" she asked with that soft voice of people who understand the pain of others. "I'm starting to be," I answered, and it was true. For the first time in 30 years, I had eaten dinner without having to serve anyone else first. I had chosen my own food, my own wine, my own time. No one had interrupted me to ask for more bread, to heat up the soup, to serve dessert. No one had criticized me for eating too fast or too slow. No one had made me feel like I didn't deserve to be there. "You know what?" I said to Sarah as I signed the check. "I think I'm going to start dining out more often." She smiled as if she understood perfectly what I had just decided. That night, when I finally got home, Howard was already asleep, or pretending to be. I didn't care. For the first time in decades, it didn't matter to me if he was awake or not, if he had eaten or not, if he had missed me or not. I took off my soaked shoes and sat on the living room sofa. Everything was exactly as I had left it. His dirty plate on the table, his clothes thrown on the floor, his newspapers scattered all over the room. But something in me had changed. Something fundamental and irreversible. I looked at the family photos decorating the mantelpiece. Howard and I on our wedding day, young and naive, believing in promises that only I would keep. Howard and I on vacation at a lake house in Michigan, where he spent the whole time reading work reports while I sunbathed alone on the dock. Howard and I at his nephew's graduation, where he introduced me as just my wife, with no name, no identity of my own. In none of those pictures was I truly smiling. In all of them, I looked like an actress playing the part of a happy wife in a play that no one else found convincing. That night I slept on the sofa, but not as a punishment, by choice. And for the first time in years, my dreams weren't nightmares. The next few days passed as if I were living in a slow-motion movie. Howard acted as if nothing had happened, as if abandoning your wife on her birthday was as normal as forgetting to buy milk. He would get up, drink the coffee I made him, put on his gray suit, and leave for work without a word about that night. But I had changed, and he knew it. On Friday morning, as I was ironing his shirts like I had for 30 years, I stopped cold. Why was I still ironing the clothes of a man who had publicly humiliated me? Why did I continue to cook for someone who treated me as if I were invisible? I left the iron on the shirt. It sat there, scorching the white cotton with a triangular shape that looked like a scar. Howard would have to go to work with a wrinkled shirt, or better yet, iron it himself. For the first time in decades, I left the house without making his lunch. I walked the streets of Lincoln Park without a destination. Chicago smelled different that morning, of freshly baked bread from the bakeries, of strong coffee from the cafes where retirees argued about baseball, of spring pushing its way through the asphalt. It had been years since I had walked through my own neighborhood without a specific mission. I was always rushing to the grocery store, the pharmacy, the dry cleaners, always with a to-do list for Howard, for the house, for everyone but me. I went into a small coffee shop on Clark Street. It was a cozy place, with marble tables and old mirrors, reflecting the conversations of people who seemed to have interesting lives. I sat by the window and ordered a latte and a chocolate croissant, the kind Howard said made me fat and that I had stopped eating to avoid his comments. The waitress, a woman my age with proud gray hair and a genuine smile, brought my breakfast. "It's nice to just sit for a minute, isn't it?" she said with a knowing look. "Sometimes you just need a moment to yourself." I nodded, unable to speak. I had a lump in my throat because it had been years since anyone had spoken to me with such natural warmth, expecting nothing in return. As I ate, I watched the other people. A young woman was working on her laptop, focused on something that seemed important. An elderly couple shared a newspaper, commenting on the news with the intimacy of people who have known each other for decades, but still find things to talk about. A man sat alone, reading a novel, completely absorbed in his private world. They all seemed comfortable with themselves. They all seemed to know who they were when they didn't have to be something for someone else. My cell phone rang. "Howard, where's my lunch?" was the first thing he said. Not hello, not how are you, not sorry for abandoning you on your birthday. "I didn't make it," I replied, surprised by my own calmness. A silence followed, stretching like taffy. Howard didn't know how to react to my first refusal in 30 years. "What do you mean you didn't make it?" His voice rose. "Evelyn, I have an important meeting at 1. I can't go out for lunch." "Well, I guess you'll have to figure it out," I said, and hung up. I hung up on my husband for the first time in my adult life. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from exhilaration, From Freedom. The phone rang again immediately. I turned it off. That afternoon, instead of going home to clean and prepare dinner, I went into a bookstore. It had been years since I'd bought a book for myself. Howard said reading novels was a waste of time on frivolous things, and that I should read cooking or decorating magazines. Something useful. I chose 3 books. One by Amy Tan that I had always wanted to read, a book of poetry by Billy Collins, and a crime novel by a Scandinavian author whose name I couldn't pronounce, but whose synopsis promised a strong female protagonist who solved her own problems. The clerk, a young woman with a nose ring and purple hair, smiled as she bagged my books. "Great choices," she said. "Tan is amazing for women who are rediscovering themselves." Rediscovering myself? Was that what I was doing? When I got home at 8 that night, Howard was sitting on the sofa with a sour look on his face and a half-eaten pizza on the coffee table. "Where have you been?" he asked in the tone he used when he thought he had the right to interrogate me. "Out and about," I replied, and went straight to the kitchen. "Out and about? What does that mean?" "Evelyn, I'm talking to you." I poured myself a glass of water and looked at him for the first time in days. Really looked at him. I saw a 60-year-old man who had grown accustomed to everything revolving around him. I saw the grumpy lines etched around his mouth, the posture of someone who expects to be served, the annoyed expression of someone who feels the world owes him something. "I was getting to know Chicago," I said. "My city, the city where I've lived for 30 years taking care of you and forgetting about myself." Howard frowned as if I were speaking a foreign language. "What's wrong with you, Evelyn? You've been acting weird since your birthday. If you're upset about the guy's joke, get over it." It was just a joke. A joke? 30 years of marriage reduced to, it was just a joke. It wasn't a joke, Howard. It was humiliation. It was cruelty. It was the last straw in a glass that's been filling up for years. "Don't be so dramatic," he said, turning his attention back to the television. "You've always been too sensitive." Too sensitive. Another one of his favorite phrases to invalidate my feelings. That night, while Howard watched the sports highlights, I locked myself in the bathroom with my new books. I filled the tub with hot water, added lavender bath salts I'd been saving for years, for a special occasion, and sank into the warm water with Amy Tan's book in my hands. I read until my fingers pruned. I read about women who made brave choices, who stood up to powerful men, who discovered their strength in the darkest of times. I read until my body completely relaxed, and my mind began to imagine possibilities it had never dared to consider before. When I got out of the bath, Howard was already asleep, or pretending to be. But this time, I didn't care if I woke him with the sound of my footsteps. This time, I didn't tiptoe around my own house. The next day, Saturday, Howard announced he was going to play golf with Robert and would be back late. "Make me something for dinner for when I get back," he ordered, as if the events of the last few days hadn't happened. When he left, I was alone in the house I had obsessively cleaned for 3 decades. I looked at every corner with new eyes. The leather sofa he had chosen without consulting me because you don't understand design. The dining table where I always sat in the most uncomfortable chair because the good ones were for guests. The bedroom closet where 80% of the space was for his clothes. I went to our bedroom and opened his nightstand drawer. I needed to find something, though I didn't know exactly what. Among crumpled receipts, blood pressure medication, and old charging cables, I found something that made my blood run cold. Photographs. Pictures of a young, blonde, smiling woman. A woman who was not me. In one of the pictures, they were together in what looked like an elegant restaurant. Howard was wearing the blue shirt I had given him last year, the one he said he only wore for special occasions. On the back of one photo, a feminine handwriting said, "To Howard, my love, thank you for making me feel special. I love you. Carmen." Carmen. The name sounded familiar. Carmen. Karen, James's wife? The woman who had been at my birthday dinner, laughing while they humiliated me. But no, this wasn't the woman I knew. This was another Carmen. Younger, prettier, more of everything I no longer was. The photos trembled in my hands. There were more. Many more. In one, they were kissing. In another, she was wearing a necklace I recognized immediately. It was identical to one I had seen at a jewelry store in the mall, the one I had pointed to excitedly 6 months ago, saying, "That's beautiful." And Howard had replied it was too expensive for our budget. Apparently, it wasn't too expensive for Carmen's budget. I sat on the edge of the bed, the photos scattered on the comforter like evidence from a crime scene. 30 years of marriage. 30 years believing we were a team, that we were building something together. 30 years of being faithful, loyal, the perfect wife while the phone rang. It was Howard. "I'm going to be later than I thought," he said in that casual voice he used for routine lies. "The guys want to grab a few beers after golf." The guys probably included Carmen. "Perfect," I replied with a calmness I didn't feel. "Have fun." For the first time in my life, I didn't ask where he was going, who he was with, or what time he'd be back. For the first time, his lies no longer hurt me. They only confirmed what I now knew for certain. My marriage had been a play where only I knew my lines. I put the photos back exactly where I found them. Howard would know I'd seen them, but I didn't care anymore. That night, I had dinner alone, reading Billy Collins's poetry by the light of candles I lit just because I felt like it. For the first time in decades, my house smelled like me. Howard came home at 2 a.m. I was awake, sitting on the living room sofa with a cup of chamomile tea in my hands, waiting for him. Not like the thousands of nights before, anxious and worried about where he was. This time, I waited with the serenity of someone holding all the cards. He came in making noise, as he always did when he'd had too much to drink. He kicked off his shoes by the entrance, threw his keys on the entryway table, and headed straight for the bedroom without looking at me, as if I were part of the furniture. "Howard," I said in a firm voice. "We need to talk." He stopped in the hallway, his back still to me. "Not now, Evelyn. I'm tired. We'll talk about whatever it is tomorrow." "Now," I insisted, and there must have been something in my tone that alarmed him, because he turned around and looked at me, frowning. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, approaching with that slightly unsteady walk he had when he'd been drinking. "You've been so strange lately." I stood up from the sofa and walked over to him. For the first time in years, I didn't lower my gaze. I looked him straight in the eye, into those brown eyes that once seemed warm and now only held calculated coldness. "Who's Carmen?" I asked bluntly. Howard blinked several times, as if processing the question. His expression shifted from confusion to surprise, and then to something resembling panic. "What Carmen are you talking about?" "Carmen is James's wife. You know her." "Not that Carmen," I interrupted. "The young blonde one. The one who writes you love notes. The one who wears the necklace that was too expensive for our budget when I wanted it." Howard's face fell completely. For a few seconds that felt like hours, he just stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. "Evelyn, I can explain." "No," I interrupted again, surprised by my own firmness. "I don't want explanations. I don't want lies. I don't want you to treat me like I'm stupid. I just want you to tell me how long you've been cheating on me." Howard ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he made when he was nervous. For the first time in 30 years, I was in control. "It's not what you think," he began, in that mealy-mouthed voice men use when they get caught. It's complicated." 2 years, I said, remembering the oldest date I had seen on the photos. "At least 2 years, right?" His silence was all the confirmation I needed. "Why?" I asked, and for the first time my voice cracked slightly. "Why stay with me if you had someone else? Why not just divorce me?" Howard sank into the armchair as if his legs could no longer support him. He rubbed his face with both hands and sighed deeply. "Because Carmen is young," he finally said. "She's pretty, she's fun, but she's not practical. She doesn't know how to cook, how to run a house. She has no experience with the important things in adult life." I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you telling me you're cheating on me with her but staying with me because I'm useful?" I asked, feeling rage rise from my stomach to my throat. "It's not that simple, Evelyn. You're stable, reliable. You know how to manage the house. You know my routines, my needs. I'm your free housekeeper," I said, finishing his sentence. "And she's your fun, your prize for being such a wonderful man." Howard looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something resembling regret in his eyes. "Evelyn, please don't be dramatic." "Dramatic?" I shouted, finally losing the composure I had maintained throughout the conversation. 30 years of my life! 30 years taking care of you, serving you, putting up with your insults, your humiliations, your silences. And it turns out this whole time you had your little princess on the side while I was your maid. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. It was as if all the years of repressed anger were pouring out of me at once. "Don't yell," Howard pleaded, glancing at the windows. "The neighbors will hear." "Let them hear!" I yelled even louder. "Let everyone know that Howard Miller, the respectable businessman, keeps his wife looking like a fool while he's off having fun with his mistress." Howard got up from the chair and approached me with his hands out, as if calming a wild animal. "Evelyn, please calm down. We can talk about this like adults." Like adults. I laughed, a sound more like a sob. "Adults respect each other, Howard. Adults don't humiliate their partners in front of strangers. Adults don't have secret lovers for years while their wife kills herself working to keep them happy. I never asked you to kill yourself working for me," he said defensively, and those words felt like a slap. "You didn't have to ask," I screamed. "I was your wife. We were supposed to be a team. We were supposed to love each other." "And I do love you," Howard said, but the words sounded empty, automatic. "Evelyn, you're important to me. Carmen she's just a phase, a midlife crisis. It'll pass." I stared at him. This man, who had been the center of my universe for 30 years, was telling me his infidelity was a phase, and that I should wait patiently for him to get over it. "A phase?" I repeated slowly. 2 years of cheating is a phase? "Evelyn, I know it's wrong, but—" "No." I cut him off for the 3rd time that night. "There are no buts, no justifications. There is nothing you can say that will fix this." I walked toward the bedroom, and Howard followed me like a scolded dog. "What are you going to do?" he asked, and there was real fear in his voice. "Sleep," I answered. "And tomorrow, we're going to talk about how we're going to get a divorce." "Evelyn, no," he exclaimed, grabbing my arm. "You can't divorce me over this. We're a family." I pulled away from his grip with more strength than I knew I had. "Family? When were we a family, Howard? When did you include me in your decisions? When did you treat me as your equal and not your subordinate? When did you defend me when your friends humiliated me?" Howard opened his mouth to answer, but no sound came out. "Exactly," I continued. "Never. I've been your housekeeper who also warmed your bed when it was convenient for you. But that's over tonight." I went to the closet and took out a pillow and a sheet. "What are you doing?" Howard asked. "Your new bed is on the sofa," I said, throwing the bedding at him. "From now on, we sleep separately." "Evelyn, this is ridiculous. We're husband and wife." "No," I corrected him. "You're Carmen's husband. With me, you just share a house. For now." That night, after 30 years, I slept alone in my bed again. Howard stayed on the sofa, and for hours I heard him sighing and shifting, as if he expected me to give in and ask him to come back to the bedroom. But I didn't. For the first time in decades, I stretched my legs across the entire bed. I put the pillow right in the center of the mattress. I read a few pages of Amy Tan without anyone telling me to turn off the light because some of us have to work tomorrow. And when I finally fell asleep, I didn't dream of Howard or Carmen or the broken pieces of my marriage. I dreamed I was flying. The next day, Sunday, Howard got up early and left without breakfast. He didn't tell me where he was going. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't ask. I used his absence to do something I'd been putting off. I called Megan, Howard's sister. She was the only person in his family who had always treated me with respect. The only one who asked about my life and not just about how I was taking care of Howard. "Megan, it's Evelyn," I said when she answered the phone. "Evelyn, what a surprise. How are you, sweetie? How's Howard?" "Howard's fine," I lied. "I'm calling because I need to ask you a favor." "Of course, what is it?" "Do you know a good divorce lawyer?" The silence that followed was so long I thought the call had been disconnected. "Evelyn," Megan finally said, her voice full of concern. "What happened?" And then, for the first time in years, I told someone the truth. I told her everything. The birthday humiliation, The pictures of Carmen, the years of belittling, the conversation from the night before. Everything. Megan listened without interrupting me once. "That bastard," she said when I finished. "That damn bastard. Evelyn, I always suspected something was wrong, but I never imagined it was this cruel." "Did you know about Carmen?" I asked. "I didn't know her name. But last month I saw him at Nordstrom with a younger woman. When I went over to say hi, he acted strangely and left quickly. I thought she was an employee or something. But now you know the truth." "Yes," Megan sighed. "And I'm so ashamed to be his sister." "Evelyn, you're right to divorce him. You should have done it years ago." Her words gave me the validation I didn't know I needed. Someone else saw what I had been living through. Someone else understood that this wasn't normal, that it wasn't love, that it wasn't what I deserved. "Can you recommend that lawyer?" I asked. "I'm going to give you the number of the best one I know," Megan told me. "His name is Eugene Martin. He's a bastard in the courtroom, but a gentleman with female clients. I'll tell him you're my sister-in-law and that you need justice." I wrote down the number with trembling hands. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to make a major legal decision without consulting Howard first. "Megan," I said before hanging up, "can I ask for one more favor?" "Anything. Don't tell Howard we spoke until I'm ready, okay?" "Of course." "Evelyn, I want you to know something. I've always really liked you. I always thought you were too good for my brother. Now I know I was right." I hung up the phone feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Support. Someone was on my side. That afternoon, while Howard was still out, probably with his Carmen, I dialed the lawyer's number. Eugene Martin's office. A deep, professional voice answered. "Good morning, Mr. Martin. My name is Evelyn Miller. Megan gave me your number. I need help with a divorce." "Of course, Mrs. Miller. Megan already called me. When can you come to my office? We have a lot to talk about." On Monday morning, Howard acted as if nothing had happened. He got up from the sofa, showered, dressed, and asked me for breakfast with the same casualness as always, as if the conversation from the night before had been a bad dream he could ignore until it disappeared. "The coffee's in the kitchen," I said without looking up from the book I was reading. "Help yourself." Howard stood in the doorway of the dining room, staring at me as if I'd spoken in a different language. "What do you mean, help myself? Evelyn, I'm late for work. I don't have time for this nonsense." "Then go buy a coffee at the cafe on the corner," I replied, turning a page in my novel. "Or get up earlier tomorrow." I saw out of the corner of my eye as Howard clenched his fists. He was used to giving orders, not receiving them. He was used to me jumping every time he snapped his fingers. "Evelyn, enough with the drama," he said in that condescending voice he used when he thought I was acting like a spoiled child. "I know you're hurt about Carmen, but you can't punish me for the rest of my life. Marriages go through crises. You get over this by talking, not by throwing tantrums." Tantrums? 30 years of humiliation and my reaction was a tantrum. I stood up from the table and looked at him squarely. "Howard, at 10 o'clock I have an appointment with a lawyer. At 11, I'm going to the bank to review all our accounts. At 12, I have an appointment with an appraiser to value this apartment. I'm not throwing a tantrum. I'm organizing my divorce." The color drained from Howard's face. He stood there, mouth agape, as if he'd just been slapped. "Are you crazy?" he stammered. "An appraiser? Why do you want to appraise the apartment?" "To know exactly what my share is of everything we built together," I answered with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "It turns out that when you get married in a community property state, you're entitled to half of everything. Who knew?" "Evelyn, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." I headed for the door to leave, but Howard blocked my path. "And where are you going to go?" he asked, a mix of desperation and anger in his voice. "What money are you going to live on? Where are you going to find a job at your age?" His questions were the same ones I had asked myself for years whenever I fantasized about leaving him. They were the invisible chains that had kept me tethered to a life that was slowly killing me. But this time, instead of scaring me, they gave me more strength. "We'll see," I said, pushing past him. "What I do know is that I'm going to live with dignity, something I haven't had in this house for years." I left him standing there, speechless. For the first time in 3 decades, Howard went without his breakfast. Eugene Martin's office was in the Gold Coast, on one of those elegant streets where every building seemed like a statement of professional success. The lawyer turned out to be a man in his 60s, with completely white hair and blue eyes that immediately inspired trust. Megan was right. He seemed like an old-school gentleman. Mrs. Miller, he said as he offered me a seat in a leather armchair. Megan gave me a brief overview of your situation, but I need you to tell me everything from the beginning, in detail. Don't omit anything, no matter how embarrassing it may seem. For the next hour, I narrated my entire life, the years of belittling, the public humiliations, the emotional neglect, the infidelity, the role of unpaid housekeeper I had played for 30 years. Eugene took notes in a leather-bound notebook, nodding occasionally and asking precise questions. "Do you have proof of the infidelity?" he asked. "I have photographs I found in his nightstand," I replied. "Did you take them?" "No. I left them exactly where I found them. But I can get them again when needed." "Perfect. Did you contribute financially to the family's assets?" "I worked for 20 years before we got married. My entire salary went to household expenses. And after we married, I continued to work for 10 more years until he convinced me to stay home to take better care of our home." "Do you have proof of that income?" "Some old pay stubs, yes. They're in a box in the closet." Eugene continued asking about properties, bank accounts, investments, insurance policies. I realized I knew almost nothing about our real financial situation. Howard had made sure to keep me in the dark about everything important. "Mrs. Miller," he said when I finished answering his questions, "I'm going to be frank with you. Your case is strong, but it's going to be a battle. Your husband seems like the type of person who would rather destroy something than share it equitably." "What does that mean?" "It means he'll probably try to hide money, devalue properties, and drag out the process as long as possible. And it also means he will try to hurt you psychologically during the proceedings." His words scared me, but not enough to make me back down. "Do you think I can win?" "With the right evidence and a bit of luck, yes. But I need you to understand something very important. From the moment you file the divorce papers, your life is going to change completely. Howard is going to react, and it won't be pretty. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of the pictures of Carmen, of Howard's laughter as I was humiliated on my birthday, of the 30 years I had wasted being invisible in my own life. "I'm prepared," I said. "Very good. Then let's begin. I need you to bring me all the documentation you can find this week. Deeds, contracts, insurance policies, bank statements, tax returns. Everything." I left the lawyer's office feeling as if I had taken the first step in a very long marathon. The Chicago air smelled different that morning. It smelled like possibilities. My next stop was the Chase Bank on Michigan Avenue. I asked to speak with the branch manager and explained that I needed to review all the accounts where I was a primary or joint holder. What I discovered left me breathless. Howard and I had a joint checking account with barely $300 in it, but he had 3 other accounts solely in his name, with a combined total of over $90,000. $90,000 he had accumulated over years while giving me $100 a week for household expenses and telling me we were barely making ends meet. I also discovered we were co-owners of 2 commercial properties in downtown Chicago that he was leasing out, which I knew nothing about. The income from those leases went directly into one of his private accounts. "Can I have copies of all these statements?" I asked the manager. "Of course, Mrs. Miller. You're a joint holder on the main account and a co-owner of the properties. You have every right to this information." When I left the bank with a folder full of documents, I sat on a bench on the street and cried. Not from sadness, but from rage. For years, Howard had made me believe we were living on the edge, that we couldn't afford vacations, decent restaurants, or anything I wanted for myself. Meanwhile, he had $90,000 saved up and was collecting rent from properties I didn't even know existed. He had kept me in psychological and economic poverty while he lived like a wealthy bachelor. That afternoon, when Howard came home, I was sitting at the dining room table with all the documents spread out in front of me like a winning poker hand. "What is all this?" he asked, but his voice no longer sounded authoritarian. It sounded nervous. "Our financial life," I answered. "The one you've kept secret for years." Howard walked over and saw the bank statements. the deeds to the properties, the proof of rental income. His face turned gray. Evelyn, I can explain. I don't need explanations, I interrupted. I just need you to know that tomorrow my lawyer is going to file a motion to freeze all of these accounts until the divorce is settled. You can't do that, he yelled. That's my money. I earned it. Your money? I laughed, a sound more bitter than sweet. The money you earned while I maintained your home, cooked your meals, washed your clothes, and enabled you to dedicate yourself completely to work? The money from the properties you bought with part of my father's inheritance, which you invested in my name without consulting me? Howard fell silent because he knew I was right. Also, I continued, tomorrow I'm giving my lawyer the pictures of Carmen. What pictures? He asked, but he already knew. The ones from your nightstand. The ones you keep like trophies of your double life. Howard collapsed into a chair as if his legs wouldn't hold him. Evelyn, please, he murmured. Don't do this. We can fix it. Carmen means nothing. You're my wife. Not anymore, I said, getting up from the table. As of tomorrow, I'm just the woman who is going to divorce you and take what is legally mine. That night, Howard didn't sleep. I heard him pacing the living room until 5 a.m, talking on the phone in a low voice to whoever was advising him in his moment of crisis. I, on the other hand, slept deeply. I dreamed I was a little girl learning to swim. At first, I was afraid to let go of the edge of the pool, but when I finally dared, I discovered I could float. The water was holding me up. The following days were like living in a war zone. Howard had moved from denial to direct attack, and his strategy was simple. Make my life a living hell until I gave in and withdrew the divorce petition. He started with the basics, money. On Wednesday morning, I discovered he had canceled all the credit cards where I was an authorized user. When I went to the grocery store for our weekly shopping, my card was declined in front of a line of people who looked at me with that mix of pity and curiosity reserved for public spectacles. I'm sorry, ma'am, the young cashier in her blue uniform said with a sympathetic expression. The card isn't going through. Do you have another form of payment? I had to leave the full cart and walk out of Jewel Osco with my cheeks burning with shame. It was exactly what Howard wanted, to humiliate me publicly, to make me feel helpless, to prove that without him, I was nothing. But Howard had made a mistake. He didn't know I had my own secret account. For years, I had been saving the loose change I found in his pockets when I did laundry, the $5 bills left over from shopping, the small amounts I could skim here and there without him noticing. It was my emergency fund, though I had never imagined the emergency would be divorcing him. In total, I had $900 in cash hidden in a cookie tin in the kitchen pantry. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I went back to the grocery store and paid for the shopping with cash. Every bill I took out of my wallet felt like a small victory. Howard also tried to isolate me socially. On Thursday, I found out he had called my few friends to tell them his side of the story. According to him, I had lost my mind, was having a nervous breakdown, and had decided to destroy our marriage over unfounded jealousy. Carmen, my old coworker, called me that afternoon. Evelyn, she said, her voice worried. Howard called me. He told me you're not doing well, that you've been having paranoid episodes and are accusing him of terrible things. Are you okay? Do you need professional help? I was stunned. Howard had not only betrayed me, but now he was trying to convince everyone I was crazy. Carmen, I said calmly, in the 30 years you've known me, have I ever shown any signs of paranoia or mental imbalance? Well, no, but Howard sounded so worried. Howard has been cheating on me with another woman for 2 years. I have photographs to prove it. Does that sound like paranoia to you? Carmen was silent on the other end of the line. You have proof? She finally asked. Yes. And I've also discovered that he's been hiding money and properties from me for years. Is that paranoia too? Oh my God, Evelyn. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, I interrupted, because Howard is very good at pretending to be the perfect husband in front of everyone else. After I hung up, I realized Howard had chosen his target well. My friend Carmen had always been an insecure woman, easily manipulated, who tended to believe the most dramatic version of any story. But her reaction taught me something important. People wanted proof, not just words. On Friday, Howard escalated his psychological warfare. He arrived home accompanied by his sister Eleanor, the most conservative of the family, a 60-year-old woman who had always believed a wife's place was behind her husband, in silence and with a smile. "Evelyn," Eleanor said as soon as she walked in, without even a hello, "we need to talk." "Hello, Eleanor," I replied. "It's good to see you too." Eleanor missed the irony. She sat on the sofa as if she owned the place, and looked at me with that air of moral superiority she had perfected over decades. "Howard told me what's happening," she began. "And frankly, Evelyn, I find it disgraceful." "What exactly do you find disgraceful?" I asked. "This," she said, gesturing vaguely. "This tantrum. This absurd revenge. Howard made a mistake, yes, but men make mistakes. It's natural. Smart women know how to forgive and move on." I stared at her in disbelief. Did she just say that infidelity was natural for men? "Eleanor," I said patiently, "your brother has been cheating on me for 2 years. He has also been stealing money from me, hiding properties, and treating me like his unpaid housekeeper for 30 years. Is that natural too? Marriages have their ups and downs," Eleanor replied, unfazed. "My generation knew how to deal with these problems without making public scenes. You're a mature woman, Evelyn. Act like one." I felt my blood boil. "Act like one? Shut up and put up with it? Pretend everything is fine while my husband humiliates and cheats on me?" "Exactly," Eleanor said with conviction. "That's what decent ladies do." Howard, who had been silent until then, nodded as if his sister had just spoken the wisest words in the world. "See, Evelyn," he said, "even Eleanor thinks you're overreacting." It was in that moment that something definitively broke inside me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet and final, like when a thread that has been holding too much weight for too long finally snaps. I got up from the armchair where I had been sitting and walked to the closet where I kept the box with the photos of Carmen that I had taken from Howard's nightstand that morning. "Eleanor," I said, returning with the box in my hands, "I want to show you something." I took out the photographs one by one and placed them on the coffee table. Howard and Carmen kissing. Howard and Carmen embracing in what looked like a hotel. Howard and Carmen toasting in an elegant restaurant. Carmen wearing the necklace I had wanted. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Eleanor looked at the photographs with a growing expression of shock. Howard had gone completely pale. "Is this also natural, Eleanor?" I asked. "Is this the kind of mistake that smart women forgive?" Eleanor opened and closed her mouth several times without making a sound. This is different," she finally murmured. "I didn't know it was so what? So systematic, so planned, so cruel." Eleanor didn't answer. She kept staring at the photographs as if she couldn't believe her eyes. Howard, desperate to regain control of the situation, turned to his sister. "Eleanor, this isn't what it looks like. Carmen is... It's complicated to explain." "Complicated?" I exploded. "What's complicated to explain about having a mistress for 2 years while your wife serves you like a slave?" Eleanor stood up from the sofa with slow movements, as if she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "Howard," she said to her brother, her voice trembling, "this is wrong. Very wrong. Eleanor, please." "No, Howard. Evelyn is right. This isn't a mistake. This is deliberate betrayal." She turned to me, and for the first time in the 20 years I had known her, she looked at me with something resembling respect. "Evelyn, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I came here to judge you without knowing the facts." "Thank you, Eleanor," I said. "But now you know the truth." Eleanor left without saying goodbye to Howard. She left him there, sitting on his own sofa, surrounded by the proof of his infidelity, without arguments, without defenses, without family allies. "Happy?" I asked him. "Is this what you wanted? To humiliate me in front of your sister so I would feel bad enough to withdraw the lawsuit?" Howard didn't answer. For the first time in 30 years, he had nothing to say. That night, while he was in the shower, I took the opportunity to call Megan. "Megan, it's Evelyn. Can I ask you something?" "Of course, what is it?" "Does Howard's whole family know about Carmen?" Megan sighed deeply before answering. "Not everyone, but some do. Robert knows," Eleanor suspected but didn't want to confirm it. "And his parents, Well, his parents prefer not to know anything that might complicate their image of a perfect family. And why didn't you tell me anything? Because I had no proof, only suspicions. And because I thought maybe you already knew and had decided to look the other way. A lot of women from our generation do. A lot of women from our generation were raised to put up with anything to avoid being alone. I corrected her. But I'm not one of those women anymore. I'm glad, Megan said. I'm very glad. Howard needs someone to set boundaries for him. He's lived his whole life believing he can do whatever he wants without consequences. Well, he's about to find out that consequences exist. On Saturday morning, I received a call from Eugene Martin. Mrs. Miller, he said, I have news. The court has granted our request to freeze the accounts. As of noon today, your husband cannot move a single dollar without a court order. Really? I asked, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. Really? And there's more. We've also secured an order for a full inventory of all marital assets. Your husband will have to declare everything he owns, including the properties he was trying to keep hidden. How long will the whole process take? Realistically, between 6 months and a year. But Mrs. Miller, I need to warn you. Your husband is going to intensify his attacks now that he realizes he stands to lose real money. Be prepared. I hung up the phone, knowing Eugene was right. Howard had played dirty, but so far it had been psychological warfare. Now that his wallet was involved, things were going to get truly ugly. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I had proof, I had a good lawyer, I had the law on my side, and above all, I had something I hadn't had in 30 years. The absolute certainty that I was right. That afternoon, Howard received the court notice that his accounts were frozen. I watched him read it 3 times, as if the words might change their meaning if he stared at them long enough. When he finished, he looked up at me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't contempt. It was fear. For the first time in 30 years, Howard was afraid of me. On Sunday morning, Howard disappeared from the house early without saying where he was going. He didn't come back all afternoon, or that night. For the first time in 30 years, I spent a full day not knowing where my husband was. And for the first time in 30 years, I didn't care. I used his absence for something I had been putting off for weeks, completely emptying his closet and packing all his things into suitcases. Every shirt I folded, every suit I packed away, every pair of shoes I wrapped in paper felt like an act of liberation. I was physically erasing his presence from my space, reclaiming the bedroom I had shared with a stranger for decades. While I worked, I found more evidence of his double life. In a jacket pocket, receipts from expensive restaurants on dates when he had told me he had work dinners. In another pocket, a bill from a jewelry store for a pair of earrings that were obviously not for me. At the bottom of a drawer, a key I didn't recognize, but that clearly opened a door to a place I didn't know. Each discovery was a stab, but also a confirmation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. Howard had built a complete and meticulous parallel life, and I had been the only fool who hadn't noticed. On Monday morning, Howard returned with dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled clothes, and the smell of alcohol. He went straight to the bedroom and stopped dead when he saw his suitcases lined up neatly by the window. "What is this?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. "Your new residence," I answered without looking up from the book I was reading. "You don't live here anymore. Evelyn, you can't throw me out of my own home." "Our home," I corrected him. "And yes, I can. I consulted with my lawyer. During divorce proceedings, either spouse can request exclusive use of the marital home if they feel threatened or harassed. And your behavior last week, trying to socially isolate me and manipulate my friends, constitutes psychological harassment." Howard opened his mouth to protest, but I continued. "Also, I have the entire conversation recorded on my phone where you confessed to your infidelity and told me I was just the useful housekeeper while Carmen was your fun. Do you want me to play it for the judge?" Howard's face fell. He didn't know I had recorded that conversation because I hadn't, but he was so nervous and guilty that he didn't dare call my bluff. "Where am I supposed to live?" he muttered. "Not my problem," I replied. "Maybe Carmen has room for you. Or maybe that secret apartment you have a key to in the pocket of your gray jacket." Howard turned even paler. He had forgotten about that key. "Evelyn, please, we can talk." "There's nothing to talk about. You have 1 hour to get your things. After that, I'm changing the locks." Howard took the suitcases in 2 trips, loading them into his BMW like a refugee from his own life. I watched him from the kitchen window, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. It wasn't sadness for him, but for all the years we had wasted being unhappy together. That afternoon, a locksmith changed all the locks on the doors. When he handed me the new keys, shiny and unused, it felt like a baptism. The house was finally completely mine. For the next week, I lived in a peace I hadn't experienced since my youth. I woke up when my body wanted to, not when Howard needed his breakfast. I ate breakfast reading the entire newspaper, not just the sections he didn't want. I watched TV shows I liked, listened to music he hated, and cooked food that I craved. But Howard hadn't given up. He had only changed his strategy. On Thursday afternoon, I received a call from Sarah, the waitress from the Grand Astor who had been so kind to me on my birthday night. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice worried, "I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number through the hotel." "I don't mind at all, Sarah. What's wrong?" "Well, your husband was here yesterday, with a young blonde woman, and with other people who looked like lawyers. They were talking about you, and what I heard, well, I think you should know." My blood ran cold. "What did you hear?" "They're planning something against you. The man who looked like the lawyer was saying something about mental incompetence and psychotic episodes. Your husband was coaching the blonde on how to act when they call her to testify against you." My world fell apart. Howard had found the cruelest way to get revenge. He was going to try to have me declared mentally incompetent to take everything and leave me on the street without a penny. "Are you sure about what you heard?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes, ma'am. And there's more. The blonde woman, she seemed uncomfortable with the whole plan. Several times she told your husband that this wasn't right, but he convinced her by saying you were going to take everything from them if they didn't fight back first." I hung up the phone with shaking hands. Howard had stooped to the lowest possible level. He hadn't just betrayed and deceived me. Now he was going to try to destroy my mental credibility to legally steal everything that was rightfully mine. I immediately called Eugene Martin. "Mr. Martin," I said when he answered, "I need to see you urgently. Howard is planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. Come to my office right now," he replied without hesitation, "and bring anything you can that proves your mental stability. Receipts from normal activities, recent medical records, testimonies from people who can vouch for your sanity." I rushed to Eugene's office with a folder full of documents, grocery store receipts showing planned, rational purchases, the paperwork for my secret bank account, demonstrating my ability to save and plan for the long term, the books I had recently bought, even the bills from the locksmith and the appraiser I had hired, anything that proved I was making logical, well-founded decisions. "This is more serious than I thought," Eugene said after reviewing Sarah's information. "Your husband doesn't just want the money, he wants to destroy you completely. This is all-out war. What can we do? We get ahead of it. Tomorrow morning, I'm requesting an independent psychological evaluation. You're going to take every test there is to prove you are perfectly sane. And furthermore, we're going to investigate Howard's witness." "Carmen?" "Exactly. If we're going to play dirty, we'll play by the full rule book. I need you to get me all the information you can on this woman, where she works, where she lives, her exact relationship with Howard." I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake thinking about how far Howard had gone in his cruelty. It wasn't enough for him to have cheated on and stolen from me for years. Now he wanted to paint me as crazy to justify taking everything. But I also thought about how far I had come. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I would be divorcing Howard, kicking him out of the house and fighting for my rights in court, I wouldn't have believed it. The Evelyn from 6 months ago would have surrendered at the first threat. She would have apologized for causing trouble. She would have convinced herself that maybe Howard was right and she was overreacting, but that Evelyn had died on her birthday night, abandoned in a restaurant like trash. The Evelyn who was born in her place was stronger, smarter, and definitely more dangerous. The next day, Friday, I underwent a 4-hour psychological evaluation with Dr. Patricia Ruiz, a forensic psychiatrist recommended by Eugene. Personality tests, cognitive assessments, interviews about my personal history, logic and reasoning exercises. Anything that could prove my mind was working perfectly. Mrs. Miller, the doctor said at the end, not only are you perfectly sane, but you show an above-average capacity for analysis and decision-making. Your responses indicate a person who has been subjected to psychological abuse for years but has developed very healthy survival mechanisms. Does that mean Howard won't be able to have me declared incompetent? With my report, it will be impossible. Furthermore, I'm going to include in my evaluation that your husband's attempt to question your mental capacity is itself a form of psychological abuse known as gaslighting. That afternoon, while I was celebrating my victory with a glass of wine on my balcony, the doorbell rang. It was a courier with a court summons. I opened it with trembling hands. Howard had filed a motion against me requesting my legal incapacitation for bipolar disorder, with severe psychotic episodes that make her a danger to herself and others. As his primary witness, he had listed Carmen Rodriguez, who had allegedly seen me behave erratically and violently on multiple occasions. I read the document twice before I started to laugh. It began as a soft chuckle and grew into a full-blown laugh, then hysterical laughter that made me cry from the force of it. Howard had made the biggest mistake of his life. Not only had he put his destructive intentions in writing, but he had involved his mistress as the main witness, a woman who, according to Sarah, was uncomfortable with the whole plan. I called Eugene immediately. I just got the summons, I told him, and Howard just handed us our victory on a silver platter. How so? He's listed his mistress as the primary witness, and I have a recording of the conversation where he planned this whole thing. I didn't have such a recording, but it didn't matter. I had Sarah's testimony, I had the photos of Carmen, I had the psychological evaluation proving my sanity, and now I had a document signed by Howard where he implicitly admitted he knew Carmen well enough to ask her to lie in court. Mrs. Miller, Eugene said with admiration, I believe your husband just dug his own legal grave. Perfect, I replied, because I have the shovel to bury him in it. The court hearing was held on a gray Tuesday in November at the Daily Center downtown. I walked into the building in a navy blue suit I had bought specially for the occasion, comfortable yet elegant shoes, and my hair pulled back in a bun that radiated seriousness and competence. I was not the broken, submissive woman Howard expected to find. I was a woman who knew her rights and was prepared to fight for them. Howard arrived with his lawyer, an older man with a severe expression who clearly charged by the hour. Carmen was with them, dressed conservatively and looking like she wanted to be anywhere else in the world. When our eyes met, she immediately looked away. Guilt was written on every line of her face. The judge, a man in his 50s with reading glasses hanging around his neck, reviewed the documents with the patience of someone who had seen too many marriages destroyed in his courtroom. All right, he said finally. We are here to evaluate the petition of Mr. Howard Miller to declare his wife, Mrs. Evelyn Miller, legally incompetent. Let's proceed with the testimonies. Howard's lawyer stood up first and presented his case with the theatricality of someone who believed victory was assured. He spoke of erratic episodes, irrational decisions, violent and vengeful behavior. He painted a picture of an unhinged woman who had lost her mind and become a danger. Then, Carmen was called to the stand. I watched her walk to the witness box with hesitant steps. She sat, swore to tell the truth, and awaited the questions from Howard's lawyer. Ms. Rodriguez, the lawyer began, do you know Mrs. Miller? Yes, Carmen answered, her voice barely a whisper. Have you witnessed strange behavior on the part of Mrs. Miller? Carmen looked at Howard, then at me, then at the floor. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Ms. Rodriguez, the lawyer insisted. Please answer the question. I have not seen Mrs. Miller behave in a strange manner, she finally muttered. Howard's lawyer frowned. Excuse me? According to your written statement, you witnessed violent episodes. I never wrote that statement, Carmen interrupted, raising her voice for the first time. Mr. Miller told me what to say, but I can't lie under oath. A murmur went through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel to restore order. Ms. Rodriguez, the judge intervened. Are you saying you were asked to commit perjury? Carmen nodded, tears in her eyes. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Miller told me that if I didn't testify against his wife, his divorce would cost him a fortune. He promised me that if I helped get her declared incompetent, we could get married and live together without any financial problems. The uproar was immediate. Howard jumped to his feet, screaming that Carmen was lying. His lawyer asked for a recess, and the judge had to threaten to clear the courtroom. When order was restored, it was Eugene's turn. Your Honor, my lawyer said with professional calm, the defense presents the following evidence of my client's complete mental capacity. One by one, Eugene presented the documents. The psychological evaluation proving my perfect mental health, the bank records proving my rational financial decisions, the statements from Megan and Eleanor confirming I had acted coherently and justifiably throughout the entire process. But the most devastating piece of evidence came when Eugene presented the photographs of Howard and Carmen that I had found. Your Honor, he said, these images prove that Mr. Miller has been carrying on an extramarital affair for at least 2 years. My client's supposed paranoia in suspecting infidelity turns out to be, in fact, a completely accurate assessment of reality. Howard slumped in his chair as if all the bones had been removed from his body. The judge studied the photographs, then looked at Howard with obvious disgust. Mr. Miller, he said, do you confirm that you were in a romantic relationship with Ms. Rodriguez while married to the defendant? Howard opened and closed his mouth several times before mumbling, Yes, Your Honor. And do you confirm that you asked Ms. Rodriguez to provide false testimony against your wife in this court? This time, Howard didn't answer. His silence was all the response the judge needed. Mr. Miller, the judge continued, his voice stern, not only have you failed to prove that your wife is mentally incompetent, but you have committed several serious crimes in the process. Witness tampering, filing false documents, and using the judicial system to attempt to commit fraud are criminal offenses that will be reported to the district attorney's office. He turned to me. Mrs. Miller, it is not only evident that you are in full command of your mental faculties, but you have shown exemplary analysis and decision-making skills during an extremely difficult situation. Your husband's petition is denied in its entirety. I left the courthouse feeling like I could fly. Howard had been exposed not only as a cheating husband, but as a man capable of perjury and fraud to get his way. His reputation was destroyed, and he now faced potential criminal charges. Carmen caught up to me on the courthouse steps. Mrs. Miller, she said, her voice trembling. I wanted to apologize. I looked at her. She was young, probably the age I was when I married Howard. Pretty in that way that only youth and money can achieve. But there was something broken in her eyes, something familiar. How old are you, Carmen? I asked. 29. And how long were you with Howard? 2 years. But Mrs. Miller, I never wanted to hurt you. He told me you didn't love each other anymore, that you lived like roommates, that the divorce was just a formality. Carmen, I interrupted gently. Howard lied to you, just like he lied to me for 30 years. The difference is, you had the decency not to lie in a court of law. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know what I'm going to do now. Howard told me that if I didn't testify for him, he'd leave me with nothing. And now that I told the truth, now that you've told the truth, I interrupted, you have the chance to start a new life without him. Believe me, it's the best decision you've made in 2 years. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized with a settlement that awarded me half of all marital assets, including the commercial properties Howard had tried to hide. I also received additional punitive damages due to the proven infidelity and the attempt at judicial fraud. Howard had to sell his BMW to pay the fines and legal fees. His professional reputation was ruined when the story of the trial leaked to his business circles. The PR firm where he worked fired him to protect their corporate image. Carmen broke up with him for good after the trial. According to Megan, Howard now lived in a small apartment in the Chicago suburbs, had started drinking heavily, and had tried to contact me several times through third parties to ask for a second chance. But I had moved on. With my share of the divorce settlement, I bought a small house in Galena, a picturesque town a few hours from Chicago. It had a garden where I planted lavender and roses, a sunny kitchen where I prepared meals just for myself, and a library where I read everything I had wanted to read for 30 years without anyone telling me it was a waste of time. On weekends, Sarah would come to visit. We had developed a genuine friendship that went far beyond waitress and customer. We cooked together, walked through the town, and talked about books and movies and the dreams we had for the future. "Don't you get lonely?" she asked me one afternoon as we watered the plants in the garden. "Sarah," I replied, "I was lonely for 30 years while I was married. Now that I'm truly alone, for the first time I feel accompanied. I have my own company. A year after the divorce, in April, I decided to do something I had been putting off since I was young: travel alone. I booked a trip to Paris, the city I had always wanted to see, but that Howard considered a waste of money on frivolities. I walked the streets of Montmartre, visited the Louvre at my own pace, and had dinner alone in small restaurants where no one knew me and no one judged me. One night, sitting at a cafe near the Eiffel Tower, I wrote in my journal, "Today I turned 60. 2 years ago, I thought my life was over. I discovered it was just beginning." When I returned to the States, I found an envelope in my mailbox. It was a letter from Carmen. "Dear Mrs. Miller," it said, "I wanted to let you know that I followed your advice. I left Chicago, moved to Austin, and started working in a school as an English teaching assistant. It's the job I always wanted, but that Howard told me wasn't prestigious enough for an executive's girlfriend. I also wanted to thank you for not hating me, for not treating me like the enemy when you had every right to. Your dignity throughout the whole process taught me how I want to conduct myself in my new life. I hope you are very happy. You deserve it more than anyone I know." I kept the letter on my desk, next to the photos of my new life, my house in Galena, my blossoming garden, the pictures from Paris, the books I had read, the recipes I had tried, the places I had visited. Every April 14th, the day that had been my most painful birthday, I celebrate my rebirth. I dress up in my best clothes, go to the Grand Astor, and have dinner alone on that same terrace where everything changed. I order the best food on the menu, the best wine, and I make a toast to myself. To the woman who rose up when they tried to bury her. To the woman who chose truth over comfort. To the woman who discovered that it's never too late to start a new life. Because some stories don't end with, "and they lived happily ever after." The best stories end with, "and finally, she lived." Have you, or has someone you know, been through a situation similar to Evelyn's? Tell me about it in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so this message can reach someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, knowing we're not alone in our battles is the first step toward freedom.